Good morning, Team Alabama. We are ready for page 152 in Hatchet. Please find it and read along on your Chromebook with me. Tomorrow, he thought, as he lay back in the darkness, tomorrow maybe the fish would be back and he would make a spear and a new bow and get some food. Tomorrow he would find food and refine the camp and bring things back to sanity from the one completely insane day. He faced the fire. Curving his body, he rested his head on his arm and he began to sleep when a picture came into his mind, or into his head. The tail of the plane sticking out of the water. There it was, the tail sticking up. And inside the plane, near the tail somewhere, was the survival pack. It must have survived the crash because the plane's main body was still intact. That was the picture, the tail sticking up and the survival pack inside, right there in his mind as he dozed. His eyes snapped open. If I could get to the pack, he thought. Oh, if I could get at the pack. It probably had food and knives and matches. It might have a sleeping bag. It might have fishing gear. Oh, it must have so many wonderful things. If I could get at the pack and just get some of those things, I would be rich, so rich, if I could get at the pack tomorrow. He watched the flames and smiled. Tomorrow, I'll see. All things come tomorrow. He slept and deep and down with only the picture of the plane tail sticking up in his mind, a healing sleep. In the morning he rolled out before true light, and in the gray dawn he built up the fire and found more wood for the day, feeling almost chipper because his ribs were much better now. With the camp ready for the day, he looked to the plane. It looked to the lake. Part of him half expected the plane tail to be gone and sunk back into the depths. But he saw that it was still there, and he didn't seem to have moved at all. He looked down at his feet and saw that there were some fish in his fish pen, looking for the tiny bits of bait, and still left from before the wind came. He fought impatience to get at the plane project and remembered sense and remembered what he had learned. First food, because food made strength. First food, then thought, then action. There were fish at hand here, and he might not be able to get anything from the plane. That was all a dream. The fish were real, and his stomach, even his new shrunken stomach, was sending signals that it was savagely empty. He made a fish spear with 2 points, not peeling the bark all the way back, but just working on the pointed end. It took him an hour or so, and all the time he worked, he sat looking at the tail of the plane sticking up in the air, his hands working on the spear, his mind working on the problem of the plane. And when the spear was done, although still crude, he jammed a wedge between the points to spread them apart and went to the fishing pond. There were not clouds of fish, but at least 10, and he picked one of the larger ones, a round fish almost 6 inches long, and put the spear point in the water, held it, and then thrust with a flicking motion of the wrist when the fish was just above the point. The fish was pinned neatly, and he took 2 more with the same ease, then carried all 3 back up to the fire, and he had a fish board now, a piece of wood that he had flattened with the hatchet, and then leaned up by the fire for cooking fish, so he didn't have to hold a stick all the time. He put the 3 fish on the board, pushed sharpened pegs through their tails into the cracks on the cooking board, and propped it next to the reddest part of the coals. In moments the fish were hissing and cooking with the heat, and as soon as they were done, or when he could stand the smell no longer, he picked the steaming meat from under the loosened skin and ate it. The fish did not fill him. They did not even come close. The fish meat was too light for that, but they gave him strength. He could feel it moving into his arms and legs, and he began to work on the plane project. While making the spear, he had decided that what he would have to do was make a raft and push paddle the raft to the plane and tie it there for a working base. Somehow he would have to get into the tail inside the plane, rip or cut his way in, and however he did it, he would need an operating base of some kind, a raft, which he found ruefully was much easier said than done. There were plenty of logs around. The shore was littered with driftwood, new and old, tossed up and scattered by the tornado, and it was a simple matter to find 4 of them about the same length and pull them together. Keeping them together was the problem. Without rope or cross pieces and nails, the logs just rolled and separated. He tried wedging them together, crossing them over each other. Nothing seemed to work, and he needed a stable platform to get the job done. It was becoming frustrating, and he had a momentary loss of temper, and as he would have done in the past when he was the other person. At the point, he sat back on the beach and studied the problem again. Sense. He had to use his sense. That's all it took to solve problems, just sense. It came then. The logs he had selected were smooth and round and had no limbs. What he needed were logs with limbs sticking out, and then he could cross the limbs, one log over the limb and another, and weave them together as he had done his wall, the food shelf cover, and the fish gate. He scanned the area above the beach and found 4 dry treetops that had been broken off by the storm. They had limbs, and he dragged them down to his work area at the water's edge and fitted them together. It took most of the day. The limbs were cluttered and stuck any which way, and he would have to cut one to make another fit then, and cut one from another log to come back to the first one, and then still another from a third log would have to be pulled in. But at last, in the late afternoon, he was done, and the raft, which he called Brush Pile 1 for its looks, hung together even as he pulled it into the water off the beach. It floated well, if low in the water, and in the excitement he started for the plane. He could not stand on it, but would have to swim alongside. He was out to chest deep when he realized that he had no way to keep the raft at the plane. He needed some way to tie it in place so that he could work from it, and for a moment he was stymied, like confused. He had no rope, only the bowstring and the other cut shoestring in the tennis shoe, which were by now looking close to dead, his toes showing at the tops. Then he remembered his windbreaker, and he found the tattered part that he used for an arrow pouch, and he tore it into narrow strips and tied them together to make a rope or tie down about 4 feet long. It wasn't strong. He couldn't use it to pull a Tarzan and swing from a tree, but it would hold the raft to the plane. Once more he slid the raft off the beach and out into the water until he was chest deep. He had left his tennis shoes in the shelter, and when he felt the sand turn to mud between his toes, he kicked off from the bottom and began to swim. Pushing the raft, he figured, was about like trying to push an aircraft carrier. All the branches that stuck down into the water dragged and pulled, and the logs themselves fought any forward motion, and he hadn't gone 20 feet when he realized that it was going to be much harder than he thought to get the raft to the plane. It barely moved, and if he kept going this way, he would just about reach the plane at dark. He decided to turn back and spend the night and start early in the morning, and he pulled the raft once more onto the sand and wipe-scraped it dry with his hand. Patience. He was better now, but impatience still ground at him a bit, so he sat at the edge of the fish pond with the new spear and took 3 more fish, cooked them up and ate them, which helped to pass the time until dark. He also dragged in more wood, endless wood, and then relaxed and watched the sunset over the trees in the back of the ridge. West, he thought. I'm watching the sunset in the west, and that way was north, where his father was, and that way east, and the way south, and somewhere to the south and east his mother would be. The news would be on the television. He could visualize more easily his mother doing things than his father, because he had never been to where his father lived now. He knew everything about his mother, how his mother lived. She would have the small television on the kitchen counter and be watching the news and talking about how awful it was in South Africa, or how cute the baby in the commercial looked, talking and making sounds, cooking sounds. He jerked his mind back to the lake. There was great beauty here, almost unbelievable beauty. The sun exploded the sky, just blew it up, and with the setting color, and that color came down in the water of the lake, lit the trees. Amazing beauty, and he wished that he could share it with somebody and say, look there, over there, and see that? But even alone, it was beautiful, and he fed the fire to cut the night chill. There it is again, he thought, that late summer chill to the air, the smell of fall. He went to sleep, thinking of the kind of reverse question he did not know if he could ever get out of this. He could not see how it might be, but he did somehow get home and go back to living the way that he had lived. Would it be just the opposite? Would he be sitting watching television and suddenly think about the sunset up in the back of the ridge and wonder how the color looked in the lake? Sleep. Okay, we're going to stop there for today. Have a great rest of your day, Team Alabama.